Benazir Bhutto, Chapter 5. General Zia raged to hold elections within 90 days, under a plan he dubbed, ironically enough, Operation Fair Play. In fact, he would reign a sole dictator for the next 11 years, never relinquishing his hold on power until death unexpectedly removed him from the scene. During his tenure, Pakistan, which has undergone so many troubles and vicissitudes, reached what was probably the nadir of as far as Benazir Bhutto is concerned. These 11 years were undoubtedly her finest. They were years of anguish and suffering for her and her family, but they proved her to be a woman of extraordinary resilience, determination, and most of all, courage. Like her father, she turned out to possess leadership gifts of a very high order. The self-serving compromises that would blight her years in power could never have been predicted from the truly heroic defiance she displayed throughout her dealings with the military dictatorship. When she fought her way to the top as leader of the PPP over the heads of the older generation, she appeared to many to have earned the position fair and square. It is very possible that the special treatment her father had always given her, treatment that others perceived as having spoiled her and given her a sense of extreme entitlement, also helped forge a toughness that would see her through hardships that would have defeated most people. The belief that the Bhuttos were unique and possessed of a unique destiny inspired in her a determination that the world should recognize and acknowledge that uniqueness. The arrogant girl was indivisible from the powerful woman who would impress the world. She had arrived at Rawalpindi in Pakistan only a few days before the coup, having finally completed her education and celebrated its conclusion with a big 24th birthday blowout at Oxford. The family reunited after a long separation, and it should be said for the last time, planned to stay there for a few days together. Then Benazir was to spend the summer working for the Prime Minister's office and Interprovincial Council of Common Interest, go to the UN in September as part of the Pakistani delegation, and then on her turn, prepare for her foreign ministry exams. Her 8 years in America and England had given her an education in Western political theory and practice, but had not perhaps endowed her with the requisite cynicism to comprehend a country in which the army exists independently of any civilian restraint. Benazir later recorded a conversation she had with her father as the Bhutto family sat at Rawalpindi during the early hours of July 5, waiting for the military escort to take Zulfikar away. "You are a student of world government," my father says to me. "Do you think Jia will hold election?" "Yes, I do, Papa." I tell him, still full of student idealism and academic logic. By supervising the elections himself, Jia will be able to deprive the opposition of any claim they were rigged and the pretext to start new agitations. "Don't be an idiot, Pinky," my father says in a quiet voice. "Armies do not take over power to relinquish it, nor do generals commit high treason in order to hold elections and restore democratic constitutions." And Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's first vision was the comfortable Prime Minister's rest house in the hill station of More, where he was taken along with several of his political cronies or henchmen, as many deemed them. There, in spite of the grim prognosis he had outlined to Benazir, he seemed to observers to be his usual optimistic, forceful, self-holding court and planning the PPP's next step. He continued to direct the Bhutto family's actions from a distance, sending Murtaza to visit his constituency in Larkana, while Nusrat, Benazir and Shahnawaz held the fort in Karachi, meeting with PPP supporters at 70 Clifton. When floods devastated Lahore, Bhutto dispatched Murtaza and Benazir there to demonstrate the PPP's solidarity with the pupils suffering. For the first time, Benazir realized that her rudimentary Urdu was a handicap to the PPP cause, and she set about trying to learn the language in a more systematic manner. Jia was behaving disturbingly, consolidating a program that combined military rule with Islamization according to fundamentalist principles. This was something new in Pakistan. A series of martial law orders forbade citizens to attend trade union, student union or political party meetings or to criticize the army in speech or writing. Socialist intellectuals and journalists were rounded up and arrested. A Sharia council was created to make sure the country's legal code was in line with Islamic law. 5 times a day prayer was enforced. Public eating and drinking during Ramadan were outlawed. Blasphemy against the Prophet was made punishable by death. The penalty for looting was punishable by the amputation of hand. Public flogging were staged in a sports stadium with thousands of spectators. Bhutto's first incarceration lasted less than a month. He was released in late July and allowed, at least for the moment, to re-enter the political arena. The outpouring of emotion among his supporters upon his release poured Benazir, and perhaps Zulfikar too, into a false sense of security. How could Jia dare destroy such a popular figure? Surely revolution would ensue if he were to be eliminated. A crowd of more than a million greeted him upon his homecoming to Karachi. Benazir remembered that what was normally a half-hour trip from the train station to our home took my father 10 hours. His car was dented and scratched by the time it arrived at 70 Clifton. Later, when he entered Lahore, the crowd were even larger, 3 million. By one estimate, Benazir acclaimed him to Rawalpindi, where their car was again more a group of women supporters of the PPP. There can be no doubt that Jia was unsettled by the show of support. He even issued a warning to Benazir and her mother not to engage in political activity. The popularity of Bhutto and the PPP made it evident that they would easily triumph in elections if they were actually held. So as Bhutto communed with his pupil in Karachi, Lahore and the Bhutto's Al-Murtaja compound in Lalkhana, Jia went to work creating a legal machinery that would bring him down for good. On August 15, the Federal Investigation Agency, now under Jia's thumb, indicated Bhutto for direct responsibility in the murder of Muhammad Ahmad Khan Kasoor, the father of political opponent who was supposed to have been Bhutto's real target. On September 3, 1977, just 2 weeks before the election campaign was supposed to begin, army commandos entered the Bhutto home at 70 Clifton and arrested Zulfikar on a charge of murder. It was a moment of supreme horror for the family when any illusion that the regime had still to adhere to the nation's legal system were shattered. The murder charge was patently fabricated. Bhutto was a ruthless politician, to be sure, but no one actually believed him guilty of this particular crime. He was released on bail 10 days later, when the High Court Justice in Lahore, by all accounts a fair and honest man, determined that the case had no legal basis. Jia, then in Iran on a public relations tour of Pakistan's Muslim allies, was outraged. "What is the constitution?" he shouted rhetorically at his Iranian host. "It is a booklet with 10 or 12 pages. I can tear them up and say that from tomorrow we shall live under a different system. Is there anybody to stop me? Today the people will follow wherever I lead. All the politicians, including the once mighty Mr. Bhutto, will follow me with their tails wagging." Jia ordered Bhutto's rearrest, but not before the latter had time to make fiery anti-Jia speeches in Multan and Karachi. On the night of September 16, army commandos climbed the wall of Al-Murtaja in Lalkhana and promptly re-arrested Bhutto under martial law regulation 12, allowing the arrest of any individual deemed by the martial law administrator, Jia himself, to be working against law, order or martial law. One of the Bhutto's last actions before his arrest was to make his wife Nusrat the acting chairman of the PPP. This is a fact Benazir found awkward when she came to write her emotional account of the events, in which her own role is exaggerated and her mother's considerable one reduced to a minimum. My mother had not wanted this public life, she insisted, had not wanted to assume the leadership of the PPP, while my father was in prison. But the inconvenient appears to be that it was not Benazir whom Zulfikar named as his political heir, nor even her brother Murtaza, who would also later attempt to assume the mantle, but Nusrat. Male children appeared more threatening than females to Bhutto's political enemies, and he would take no risk, knowing that the military authorities would have few qualms about disposing of them. He ordered Murtaza and Shah Nawaz to leave for Europe immediately. Murtaza headed for England while Shah returned to his college in Switzerland. Neither of them would ever see their father again. Sanam proceeded to Harvard. According to Benazir's account, Zulfikar agreed to her staying on in Pakistan, albeit with reluctance, for she too would inevitably be made a target by the regime. Zulfikar was moved from prison to prison in an effort to keep his location a secret from the public. First it was Sukkur, then Karachi, then Kot Lakhpat jail in Lahore. Nusrat and Benazir continued to contest the elections for the PPP. At the age of 24, Benazir, a polished speaker thanks to her years in the Oxford Union, but still politically naive and above all unaccustomed to the tremendous surging Pakistani crowds, began her public career, delivering her first major speech at a huge public meeting in Faisalabad and following it up with others throughout the Punjab, with not only Zulfikar but also many other PPP notable in detention. Benazir and Nusrat were trying to fill in as many gaps as possible. Then in Sahiwal, on September 29, police surrounded the house Benazir was staying in and informed its owners that it had been made a sub-jail. Benazir and her host would be detained there for the next 15 days. During that time, Jia cancelled the elections. All bets were now off as the unpredictable dictates of martial law replaced the legal framework to which Jia had so far been pretending to adhere. Benazir, after all, had not been breaking any law when she was arrested. Not even one of the emergency martial law measures. Her arrest was the signal that Jia felt confident to break free of constitutional guarantees. With power, he was gaining confidence. She could no longer depend on legal or constitutional rights. There were no safe places. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's murder trial began on October 14 and lasted 5 months. Former U.S. Attorney General Rami Clark attended it, later describing the proceedings not as a trial of murder but the murder of a trial, a kangaroo court of the most egregious kind. The acting Chief Justice conduct would make Judge Julius Hoffman in the Chicago 7 trial a model of a decorum. He publicly commented on Bhutto's guilt outside the courtroom before conviction. His prejudice is spread through his 145-page decision. The evidence presented against Bhutto, even if believed, would not support a verdict of guilt. And the Chief Justice was selected by General Jia, who had removed his predecessor. 4 of his associates were appointed by General Jia. The only evidence against Bhutto was hearsay, coming from extremely unreliable sources, men who had been arrested and probably tortured, then released in order to give the desired testimony. The Chief Justice, Maulvi Mustaq, was an old enemy of Bhutto's and a pal of Jia's. He appeared to enjoy abusing and humiliating the defendant. Judges who had previously released Bhutto on bail were dismissed from service. Benazir, who had been released from detention after elections were safely cancelled, attended the trial whenever possible, appellate. By the way the proceedings were conducted, she still retained enough faith in Pakistan's vestigial ties to the British legal system to believe that her father must inevitably be acquitted, especially when the ballistic report clearly demonstrated that the killing could not have been committed in the manner that the prosecution claimed. Again, Zulfikar had to tell her the truth that should have been obvious by now. They are going to kill me. It does not matter what evidence you or anyone comes up with. They are going to murder me for a murder I did not commit. In October, Benazir had been made a member of the PPP Central Committee. Raja Anwar, a one-time Bhutto supporter who in later years wrote thoughtfully about the PPP and his engagement with the party, has stated in no uncertain terms that at that time she was no more than a spare wheel to her mother. Also, as he wrote, like everyone else at the time, Begum Nusrat Bhutto lacked the insight to foresee her husband's fate and therefore to plan to circumvent it. As for the PPP, it was more a rebel than a party. Bhutto had never encouraged party democracy or a strong local structure with solid grassroots rings. He once claimed that I am the People's Party and they are all my creatures, a lesson that his heirs learned only too well. Anwar and others have maintained that a compromise could have been reached that might have saved Bhutto's life. He could have gone into exile at least for a while if he had agreed to hand over leadership of the party to one of his colleagues such as Ghulam Mustafa Jatoi, a confounder of the PPP, who would have come to some kind of modus vivendi with the army. However, Anwar goes on. The Bhutto ladies denounce all these suggestions as an army plan to deprive the Bhutto family of the leadership of the PPP and oust it from the politics of Pakistan. Would it be fair to say that in the keenness of his family's ambition, Pakistan's unique son was sacrificed? Fair or not, it is a fact that the Bhutto ladies had created such a grief-laden atmosphere around the issue that it appeared to the people of Pakistan that their only objective should be to prevent the leadership of the party from going into the hands of a non-Bhutto. Neither then nor at any other time were party elections held. The PPP had begun as a Bhutto fiefdom and it would continue that way. Despite the stated allegiance of Benazir and her father to the parliamentary system, there was to be no democracy inside the PPP, as there is in Britain's Labour and Conservative parties, a fact that would become increasingly galling to PPP insiders and would give the lie to Benazir's pretensions as beacon of democracy, particularly when in 1993 she declared herself chairperson for life. Nusrat, like her daughter, had no wish to condone dissent from other party members, and eventually the PPP would be openly referred to as the BFP, the Bhutto Family Party. The Bhutto woman's attitude was intransigent and confrontational at this point, but then Zulfikar himself was intransigent and confrontational, and it is questionable whether he would have ever been content to compromise, much less to languish in behavior, in exile, out of the limelight, in England, Switzerland or the Arab world. If Benazir's behavior can be seen in retrospect as foolhardy, it was behavior her father would have entirely condoned. Benazir and Nusrat had set up a PPP center in a house lent to them by a Lahore supporter. Here they attempted to muster legal evidence to help Zulfikar's lawyer, led by Yahya Bakhtiar, in their battle for their client's life. They also put out a book called Bhutto Rumor and Reality, a risky business since the authors or publishers of seditious, that is pro-PPP literature, could be arrested and jailed. Nusrat declared a nationwide Democracy Day on her husband's birthday, January but very little action from the Pakistani people resulted, and when people did demonstrate, the backlash from the regime was vicious. One event that was to go down in PPP glory was the time Nusrat and Benazir decided to provoke a crisis at a cricket match in Lahore in order to demonstrate the brutality of Jia's regime. PPP supporters were stationed inside and outside Gaddafi Stadium and began shouting slogans and heckling the crowd while the police launched their predictably ferocious response. The Bhutto ladies got in the fracas. They had instigated both sustained injuries, particularly Nusrat, who was beaten severely about the head. The two women would always claim that the demonstrations were spontaneous and that they just happened to be on the scene by accident. My mother and I decided to go to a cricket match to take our minds off the trial. Benazir wrote in her autobiography, insisting that the police had planned the attack on them. The implications were enormous. She went on, women had never been singled out for punishment or harassment. But Raja Anwar, an accomplice of theirs, that they refused this claim, and indeed the idea that a Bhutto woman would go off to watch cricket while Zulfikar trial was underway is patently ridiculous in any event. The propaganda was valuable to the PPP, and the photographs of the bedwaggered, fainting Nusrat effectively horrifying. In later years, Benazir would attribute her mother's Alzheimer's disease to the beating she took that day, and this too was good propaganda, though medically dubious. Throughout Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's trial, his wife and daughter were kept on tenterhooks, detained under house arrest repeatedly, then released in just as arbitrary a manner. Benazir believed that it was being done to keep them off step, unable to plan an efficient counter-attack. In the intervals between detentions, Benazir toured the Bhutto homeland of Sindh, addressing legal and professional associations, as well as the usual crowds, learning to project her voice powerfully as microphones had been banned by the military regime. In March, rumors began to circulate that the Lahore High Court was soon to reach a guilty verdict and a death sentence for Bhutto. To quell the public expression of outrage, the regime began rounding up and detaining PPP members in the tens of thousands. These political prisoners were incarcerated in inhuman conditions. The man rest. Benazir herself was taken into custody once again. The morning of March 18, several hours later, it was revealed that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had indeed been found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. The fruitless appeal process ground out over the course of the next year, during which time the unhappy Zulfikar languished in increasing deprivation and discomfort. He was emaciated and his gums became severely infected. Benazir visited him on the rare occasions that this was allowed, bringing him gifts of books and bottle of his favorite Salimar Cologne. But she too was frequently held in custody, unable to see him. Appeals for clemency poured in from bird readers, including Leonid Brezhnev, Indira Gandhi, James Callaghan, Muammar Gaddafi, Anwar Sadat, and even after much hesitation, US President Jimmy Carter. I was as he was. Zulfikar Carter III. Zulfikar did not sit idle. He prepared his own legal appeal, speaking before the court for 4 days without notes, and he managed to smuggle a manuscript out of his cell, giving his view of the conspiracy against him. Destined for a columnist at the Financial Times, Benazir acted as his amanuensis, holding up with his legal team to type out his rejoinder to the charges, later circulated in mimeograph under the title of If I Am Assassinated. She was supported by her friend Yasmin Niazi, Amina Piracha, and Victoria Sophie, who had succeeded her as president of the Oxford Union and had now come over from England to stand at her side. Nusrat began setting up Pupils Action Committee to agitate locally against the regime, with volunteers committing civil disobedience and courting arrest on September 15, 1978, the day before Zia-ul-Haq proclaimed himself Pakistan's president. The first of these demonstrations occurred in the city of Rawalpindi, where Bhutto was being held in prison. The agitation spread to other cities, and two members of the action committees even set themselves on fire. Banerjee and Nusrat toured the country, giving speeches and calling for a countrywide day of protest. Inevitably, every effort to save Bhutto failed. Zia could not risk keeping him alive, even in exile, while Bhutto had been an authoritarian, strong-armed leader who, for all his populist rhetoric, had done very little for Pakistan's common man. He symbolized something much greater than himself. Hope for the impoverished Pakistani everyman. He may not have improved life for Pakistan's poor, but at least he had, unlike nearly all his predecessors, acknowledged their needs and their humanity. There has always been a religious element in Pakistani politics, enhanced by the fact that so many political figures came from great Bardo families. The subcontinent is rich with the tomb of Muslim saints or Sikhs. Like Christian saints, the Sikhs serve as intermediaries between high power and the people, and local cult grew up around their tombs with tales of miracles performed by the defunct Sikhs. Descendants of the Sikhs were known as priests, and their feudal authority is enhanced by the aura of sanctity around the family. The Bhuttos of Larkana were a particularly notable peer family, and they augmented their position by assiduous attention to their religious duties as guardian of the local. The family's status as peers permeated the culture of the PPP, of which other prominent peers were also founding members. Observers have remarked that PPP rallies reassembled resembled revival meetings, with supporters chanting slogans in a state of apparently religious rapture. The question of just Thank you very much for